All right. Hello, everyone. Sarah here from Mappy Hour. I'm very excited to have you all here tonight. Before we officially get started, a few ground rules for everyone. We have a chat feature, as you can see, and I can see Colleen already said hello from New York City. So head in there, say hi, where you're calling in from, where you're going to travel once that opens back up, and we'll get the conversation going. And I did want to just put a note out there that our chats are for everyone. And so we just ask that you be kind. There's no bullying, no intolerance, nothing like that that is acceptable in the chat. And I will be keeping an eye on it. So please just be nice to each other and ask your questions for Jeremy as we go along so that at the end of the talk, I can share them with him and you can actually get your questions answered. So one little Mappy Hour announcement. This is actually our last official event of the year. And I'm really excited for 2021. We have a few really cool things coming up. And so if you are someone who has been involved with Mappy Hour, is interested in being a little bit more involved, especially with all this cool digital stuff, maybe even leading something or helping people, other people learn something online. If you want to give me an email, it's us at sarah@outdoorfest.com. Shoot me an email. I would love to have you be part of this small group that we're putting together of people who are kind of going to ideate and think of what 2021 going back in person is going to look like. So would love to hear from you. Ideas are welcome. Showing up and giving feedback is welcome, whatever that looks like. So with that, I am so excited to introduce Jeremy Hance. Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
Yes, I'm excited to have you here. Where are you calling in from tonight?
Calling in from St. Paul, Minnesota. Right, near near Canada a little bit. Yeah, I've been living here for good 11 years or so.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a really fun Mappy Hour event with the Mountaineer earlier in the summer, and that's the closest I've gotten so far to Minnesota, but I definitely want to check it out. Sounds like there's a lot of cool nature around there.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful state. There's a lot to see here and do for sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you're into nature and wilderness.
That's my thing for sure. Awesome. All right, let's hop into this. So who are you? Please introduce yourself and give us a little like pitch of your book. We're obviously going deep into it, but
sure.
Who are you? What did you write about?
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Hance. I'm an environmental journalist by trade. I've been doing environmental journalism for 15 years now or something crazy like that. And was working for a long time at a place called Manga Bay, which writes about the whole world, focusing a lot on the tropics. And then I eventually went freelance. And then this year I had my first book come out. And it's really the story of what it's like to be an environmental journalist, hopping around the world, chasing animals, going to really remote places, but at the same time doing it with mental health issues. So I have depression, anxiety, and especially OCD is sort of the main one in the book. And so it's sort of the story of how I deal or don't deal with some of those issues as I'm running around the world doing this job that I love and I feel is very important, and sort of how I cope and learn to get sort of better at times, and all the ridiculous situations I get myself into. But the book is, as much as it's about that, it's also about nature and sort of this time in our world when we're losing a lot of nature and the people trying to save species and places. So there's a lot of sort of interweaving themes between that and the mental health story.
Yeah. And so how did you even get into writing in the first place?
Yeah, I kind of fell into journalism. I was an English major. I love books. I love big books by long dead people. And then I did a master's in this great books program in St. John's out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And while I was doing that, I had all this time on my hands, and I had always been in love with the natural world, and with animals, especially when I was a little kid and stuff. So I just started doing some writing around that, and a lot of it focused on a trip to Peru that my fiance at the time, now my wife, and I took. where we spent 2 weeks in the Amazon rainforest. And that was a really life-changing experience. When I came back from that, I've just felt a need to try and learn more, express myself. And so I started kind of just writing little op-eds and sending them out. And eventually that led to an internship at Manga Bay. And then eventually that led, after about a year, to a full-time job. And so it was sort of these stepping stones. There wasn't really a plan. I mean, I had no journalism experience and I had no like real hard science experience. But I think what I brought to the job was an ability to sort of communicate things that I was excited about and that I wanted to learn, and do it in a way that other people could understand, because I myself was learning as I was doing the writing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so, I mean, I just learned over time and hopefully got better, learned a lot, learned on the job. And then eventually kind of, slowly created this career that I now have. And then eventually that led to this book.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like writing is one of those things where it's just like, do more of it.
Yes. Do more of it and like get lucky. Like there's a lot of really talented
Right.
writers out there. There's a lot of journalists with a lot more experience. And I just kind of, it was one of those weird things where I was in the right place at the right time, and had enough free time sort of to make that a big part of my life, and do it without pay for a while. And just, that just gave me the opportunity. Right. And then I just was able to kind of do the job.
Yeah. Cool. And then obviously we're talking about your book tonight. So how does one go from being a, published author, especially in digital publications, to writing a book? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of journalists, after you've done it for a while, it's a really difficult job. And increasingly now you're expected to write so much and be so active on social media and stuff. And I think a lot of journalists, there sort of starts to creep in that idea of, I could write a book. There's this romantic idea of, I want to do something really long. That idea of so much journalism is quite short. And so the idea of being able to try to express yourself and tell a different story. And so it sort of started like that. But I think, at first I didn't want to write this book because, I mean, this idea kind of got in my head, but I'm like, I don't want to share mental health stuff. Icky. Like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, that's not,
I have so many questions about that coming later as well.
Yeah. I didn't really want to get into it, but the book just kept biting away at me and kept kind of hooking me. And eventually it was the book I needed to write. And it was the one that I wanted to tell, even though there was a part of me that was still like, oh, don't do this. So eventually I kind of got over that part, and I talked to my family, because there's stuff about my family in there and my wife and, other people, just to make sure everyone was cool with me sort of sharing some of these stories. And I just, and that just became sort of a natural progression of sort of like, well, I do want to write a book, and this seems like the book that won't let go.
Right.
Whereas there were some other book ideas, but those were just at the time not as, didn't have their hooks in me in the same way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess kind of, let's dive into it. You talk a lot about mental health and your struggles with mental health in this book. And in one part, you talk about your childhood and how adults maybe didn't always deal with it as maturely or responsibly as you would have liked. And also that, I don't know how to say that.
No, that's great. That's very
some
true.
people were not the best about it. And also that, like, you didn't feel like you wanted to be super public. And like, I think you called it like a walk of shame once, walking into a therapist's office. And so writing a book is obviously like the complete opposite of that, and like publishing it and coming to talk to us about that stuff. So like, how did that transition happen for you? And do you think like the world, I mean, these are kind of two questions. Like for you, how did you go from feeling like that as like a fifth grader, I think it was, to being open now? And like at the same time, do you think the world has changed as well? And like the conversation about mental health or mental health stigma has changed?
Sure. So yeah, just to provide a little background. So I grew up in a small pretty conservative town in Minnesota, sort of in the exurbs. At the time, it was really a rural farming community, and it still has some of those roots. And it's a beautiful place, a lot of really nice people. But mental health stigma. This was the 80s and 90s. There was starting to be more conversation around mental health, I think. But I was growing up at a time and in a kind of a conservative culture where not everyone, but there was a certain segment of the population that the idea of a kid struggling with depression and anxiety sounded ludicrous. And, you know, and I just felt personally a lot of shame. I mean, obviously with my peers, especially, like I didn't want the other kids to know that, you know, here I
Yeah.
am spending a lot of my time in psychologist's office. But yes, I had a number of run-ins with you know, with adults throughout my teens that were not where that stigma was alive and well.
Mm.
And my parents did too. My parents both struggled with mental health. My brothers did too. We all had run-ins with certain people. Um,
Mhm.
and so that just that leaves wounds and that leaves vulnerabilities. But I do think, to your second question, I think it's wrapped up in the overall idea is that yes, things have gotten better. I think there is less stigma. I think also just, you know, part of it is that I don't live in a small conservative
Mm.
community anymore. I've traveled the world. I've lived in many different places. I've you know, just kind of broken out of that shell of when I was a teenager. Um, and at the same time, you know, it has gotten better, I think, in many parts of the world. Obviously not everywhere.
Right.
And there, I think there's still a lot of people, obviously, who there's still a major stigma, but it's gotten a little bit easier. And I think part of that is just myself becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of, hey, this is who I am. This is a part of
Mhm.
who I am.
Yeah.
It's not something. It's funny because if you knew me, if you know when you know me personally, I don't talk about it personally that often. Like my friends are aware, but I don't sit down every day with them and when we're hanging out and be like, let me tell you about my mental health issues
Yeah.
today. No, because that's not what the, you know, that's what your therapist is for. That's for other things. And so they often, a lot of them have been surprised when they read the book because they had no idea how bad it could get.
Yeah.
But I felt like the book increasingly just became clear that, like, if I was going to tell this story, if I was going to tell the story of me running around the world with my mental health issues,
Mhm.
I needed to be very honest about it, and I needed to kind of go to some dark places at times, and also some funny places, and I needed to just be honest and truthful and candid, and then, you know, let the chips kind of fall where they may. And the nice thing is most of the reaction I've gotten has been really wonderful. A lot of people have really enjoyed the book, thought it was very funny. A lot of
It's
people have come to
hilarious.
me. Yeah, a lot of people have come to me and said that, you know, it really opened their eyes about what it's like. And, you know, one of the reasons I wrote it is to write a book for, you know, if you're struggling with mental illness, it to write a book that could be something that you could read, you could feel a little less alone, but it's also just not a complete downer. You know,
Mhm.
it's not, there are a lot of really great mental health memoirs that are very dark, and I
Mhm.
didn't want to write that book. And other people have written that book much better. So I wanted a book that you could come to, maybe feel a little less alone, learn a little bit about OCD or other kind of, you know, illnesses, um, and then, you know, but also get a laugh out of it, you know, and have
Mhm.
an experience with these places and these people and these species. So, you know, it's a lot of it mental health, just like with any of us. It's getting to know yourself better, and it's coming
Mhm.
to a certain comfort zone.
Yeah. Do you think writing this book changed, like, how you talk about mental health, or it's just one way to, like, codify it almost?
No, it really did. I mean, writing the book certainly, you know, I did research on
Yeah.
mental health for like the first time in a long time. Like, it's not something I'm
Right.
like, let me spend my day looking up my ailments, you
Yeah.
know. Um, you know, I talked to my therapist about it, and then in the process of writing the book, I was sort of reliving, because each chapter is sort of another trip, and so
Mhm.
each month I would be working on a new chapter. I'd be kind of reliving that trip in ways. I would have dreams about that trip. It was really weird, and then I would be kind of reliving, you know, that moment in my life, and thinking about the way my mental illness, where it was, the when, and the
Mhm.
different things I was doing at that time to try and mitigate uh, my anxieties and my issues. So it was, I think it really did. I really did explore kind of those experiences in a different way, and I think that helped kind of enrich the book, hopefully,
Yeah.
um, in how, you know, I'm able to kind of write about mental health, because it isn't an easy thing necessarily to write about.
No. And I think on the other side of things, like, there are many travel memoirs out there as well. There aren't that many that, you know, can dive in and really like, are super personal, and there's like
Yeah.
this narrative the way that you did it. So I thought that those two things were really unique when combined.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was one of the things. Like, I love travel writing. I really love reading great travel books. And part
Yeah.
of the one reason I love travel, you know, one of the things is that you get to go with these travelers who at least on paper
Yeah.
seem such good travelers,
Yeah.
right? They're always suave, you know,
Yeah, hanging out with shamans and
yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm
redwoods.
doing this, and it's just they make it seem so easy. And like, as someone who's done these trips, you know, I know that, like, either there's a level of artistry or these are just really unique individuals, and it might be a bit of both.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write a travel book for more normal people who, who do get scared in a flight, or who do get, stomach sicknesses when they're abroad, or get nervous about being on a motorbike in Indonesia or whatever.
Right.
I wanted to speak to something, because it is, traveling to places that are very culturally different in remote areas, the way that I do it is very challenging. And I wanted to kind of pay homage to just how emotionally exhausting, and like, it's okay. Like but then you come back with this experience that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but especially with Instagram and the curation of travel or content in general, you never see the I'm so tired.
Yeah, where's the picture of them puking in the toilet, or
I just eats for 24 hours.
Yes, and that is such a real part of travel. And anyone who's gone abroad, especially if they've gone to certain, to different places and spent a long time there, or gone to really remote areas, we all know that that's a part of it. And so I didn't want to shy away from that. Now, obviously that's kind of what the book is about, is that my own idiosyncrasies and how that plays into that. But I really wanted to make clear that this is hard. There are wonderful things about this kind of traveling, and I feel so blessed to have done each of these trips, but it's freaking hard,
Yeah. Yeah. I also, sorry, we just got a question, which I will ask. So I just wanted to say, Colleen, I saw your question. So to go into travel for a second, you wrote about a lot of fantastic places and trips. Can you pick a favorite?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I have a few different favorites. Okay. It kind of depends on the quality. I think what I will say is probably my two different favorites for more remote adventure travel.
Sure.
The Amazon rainforest, because there's no place anywhere near as biodiverse and as rich. And when you go there, it's the most sort of weird. I'm a nature lover, but it's the most spiritual experience I've ever had, in the sense of just being surrounded by unbroken forests, by billions of life forms. And you don't really go there and see, you don't always go there and it's not like you see a jaguar everywhere and you see these big animals. It's not like that. But it's just the small things, the insects, the incredible amount of life, the frogs, listening to them at night, the morning chorus of animals, the monkeys, and it's an incredible experience. So I would say that's probably number one, but a very close number two would be sub-Saharan Africa. Flip side of all the big animals, the elephants, the giraffes, the lions.
No water.
Yeah. And being in a safari and never knowing that day what you're going to see, and that is, and I write about both those places in the book in different places. But those two places are just so rich. And, in the Amazon rainforest, I've spent time with indigenous tribes, and that in itself is its own really wild experience.
Yeah.
And then if you go to sub-Saharan Africa, one of the things I love about that region of the world is the people are just the warmth and the community, the sort of the do it togetherness of that region of the world. At least that's what I've experienced, is always really just amazing and enriching. And I feel like we have a lot we could learn from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'd say those two places, probably the Amazon and sub-Saharan Africa, are my two favorite.
Amazing. Both places I would love to go. So
yes, and those are lifetime trips too. If you can get there even once, it will blow your mind either way.
Yeah. Wow. And I actually pulled a quote that you have about nature when you were in the Amazon, because I really loved it. And as you know, Mappy Hour, all about nature, so I felt like it fit. He said, "Nature is where I find God. When I'm in the woods, my breath feels like a prayer. A grove of old trees is like a church." So I thought that was really beautiful. And I want to share that with everyone listening who hasn't read the book yet. Go read it for quotes like that. But I also want to ask about your relationship with nature. And, you mentioned very briefly that in your conservative Minnesota small town, that mental health was potentially seen as something where you weren't as close to Jesus as you could be, or potentially Jesus wasn't helping in a certain way. I don't really know this side of things. I'm Jewish, but that kind of rhetoric versus seeing nature as your church. Do you think that like growing up in that that environment might have influenced that, or do you think like you would have felt that either way, and that's just like a natural?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question. So yeah, I mean I grew up, this small town conservative, and those are kind of like direct quotes that we would get from people sometimes about like Jesus. You wouldn't have mental illness if you were closer to Jesus, and it's like, well, I've been trying to be close to Jesus,
Right.
like, when you grow up in that kind of a town, like I was raised Catholic, and then we switched to Methodist, and so I went through that experience, but I think for a lot of us, people find their religious or their spiritual meaning in different places, right? And I think for me, whether it's just due to genetics or due to child, experiences, it's always been nature where I feel the most at peace and the most connected. And I think that's true of a lot of people. I think one of the interesting things about sort of where we've gone in the last 100 years or so is that we've gotten so disconnected from nature that I think that is in some ways might be responsible for some of the despair and the loneliness in the world. But I've just personally felt really connected to nature ever since. I mean, I grew up on a farm of 40 acres, so I could just run around. And it was like a hobby farm. My parents, we weren't real farmers. But I just spent a lot of time out, exploring, and we had a lake nearby. And that was one of the great things about growing up in this town is like, it was beautiful. And so I think for me that's a part of my own development experience, and it still is. And some people find God through music, some people find God through books or religion, a nice set of rules and all that. And I think that's where I find my closest to some kind of larger purpose and meaning and godlike spirit in the world is when I even went for a walk today. I just needed to like get out with this COVID, and just being out and all the trees have lost all their leaves and everything's kind of barren and wintry, but like just being outside for like an hour was just helpful, right? And I had moments where I felt a little more connected and a little less frazzled. And I think there's some really interesting scientific research now that I talk about a bit in the book about how nature sort of connects with us and how we kind of how we're sort of evolutionarily so connected to it, and how it can be beneficial for our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's essential.
Yeah.
It's awesome because you're in a city right now and you're still connecting with the trees and I guess there's no grass, but
not a lot. It's actually weirdly a little green, but we don't have any snow yet. But yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about the coronavirus, as it's devastated the world, obviously, shut everything down. We're all lonely. We're all exhausted. We're all stressed. But I think one of the balms that we can all find, even if it's just going out in your backyard and looking at the stars, or if it's just spending some time watching a bird feed, or even if you're someone who's not able to go to, there are different ways to try and connect to nature. And I feel like, at least for me, and increasingly I see on social media that this is kind of becoming the thing that like people are sort of reconnecting.
Yeah.
I talked to a scientist in Kenya recently, and he was saying how he's an entomologist, and he was saying that he would got all these messages from old people, young people who had just like gotten out in nature for like for some of the first times, and we're just like sending him messages being like, I saw this insect, like what is it? And he's like,
I don't know.
But it was because of COVID that they like sort of stopped their lives, slowed down, and noticed the beauty around them.
It's a good silver lining.
Yeah,
and hopefully something that continues past COVID times.
Yes, I do hope that that maybe this could be one thing we could learn as a species out of this is, we are not disconnected from nature. Like, we're both for good and ill. Like, the coronavirus came from a natural source. It came because we were messing with nature in destructive ways. And, at the same time, nature is something that can just enrich our lives so much. And we need to find a better balance than we have.
Yeah. And, I would say probably most of the people watching tonight are based in the US and are Americans. Was there a specific culture, group of people that you found on your travels that was really connected to nature in a way that either surprised you or that you found really interesting?
Yeah, I mean, so spending time with indigenous tribes in the Amazon is is amazing. I don't speak. So I was with a Warani guide in Ecuador in 2010, and I don't obviously speak Warani. He doesn't speak English. Neither of us spoke Spanish. But he took me around for a day, and I think what was most amazing, there was a couple things that really stuck out from that, but we couldn't talk. I couldn't be like, hey dude, what do you feel about nature? Not that he would really even be like, that's such a weird question, right?
Right.
Like,
that's
such a Western idea, right? But as we were doing this hike together, what I noticed was how well he was so in tune. Like he'd just be like, oh, look at the bird there. Oh, look at that. And I wouldn't see any of this stuff until he pointed it to me. He would find frogs in the leaf litter. He would see monkeys and birds that I couldn't see. He was walking barefoot, which I was like, are you bonkers? But like, that's normal, like
right.
They, living in the Amazon, being born there, raised in this culture as an indigenous person, even an indigenous person today, where these tribes are sort of being pulled apart by modern forces. There's still such a deep connection to the land in which they have grown up in. And so I got to see that firsthand, but at the same time, he was fascinated by my camera. Every time I took a picture, he wanted to see the picture, and he loved it when I would he kept being like, take pictures of me. And then he wanted to see them. So like, he was also, again, like me, like, we're sort of torn apart by these different forces of technology and sort of a different way of life. But it was a really interesting experience of seeing that. And I think experiences with indigenous people often lend to a sense of how they view and experience nature in a very different way. Less as an idea of like we have to control it, or we need to like maintain it or contain it, and much more of a sense of living within the system, which is obviously something that the Western world that's not really been our outlook for several thousand years, really. But I think it's wisdom that would be helpful going forward into climate change and mass extinction and biodiversity crisis and all these things of thinking about different ways to live within a system rather than always trying to manage and control everything.
Right. Yeah. And I think like just now people are starting to really listen and uplift Native voices in the States as well. So that's, yeah.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an important, the cultures have been here for thousands of years, have a ton of wisdom, a ton of knowledge. I mean, they know all these plants in the rainforest, they know what each one can do as far as healing purposes. So if we're talking about finding new medicines, like that's,
right.
You start with the indigenous people. But they're being, in many ways, many of the tribes are being really under assault by various forces. And it's a heartbreaking story, but at the same time, they're also trying to raise their voices, trying to fight back. And so there's this whole kind of struggle going on in that region of the world that I hope will go the right way, but we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Back to travel.
Yeah, sorry, that's got a little
transition on that one. Actually, we'll do a PSA. It's Giving Tuesday. There are a lot of awesome organizations that you can donate to before Giving Tuesday is over in a few hours. So do that, everyone. All right. Travel question for you. So COVID ends sometime soon. Where do you go on your first post-COVID trip?
Probably Indonesia.
Okay.
So yeah, I had to cancel a trip to Indonesia when COVID had hit. And there's a species there called the Sumatran rhino, which I write about in the book a few times. And it's one of my favorite animals. And I've kind of become this weird go-to reporter for this species. Like I've written a lot about it. I've been to Indonesia twice now. And I've also visited them in Malaysia when they were still there. So it's the world's smallest rhino species. It's hairy. It's a rainforest species, and it sings like a dolphin or a whale. It makes these really strange sounds, which no one really knows what that means. But they are very lovely and personable, and they're down to about probably between 35 and 80 animals left in the world.
Wow.
And I've been able to go visit a small captive population that's kept in Indonesia, in Sumatra. And so my plan would be to try and go back there and kind of do some stories and maybe even potentially a book someday on sort of where we're at now on trying to save this species. It's sort of a last chance kind of to really turn around the situation for this large mammal, the most closely related mammal to the woolly rhino that went extinct. So it's a really cool, amazing story, and they're such a beautiful species. And yeah, I think I would probably go there first. And Indonesia is another place in the world that's just amazing, incredible people, some of the best food you've ever eaten, and amazing wildlife, but also a lot of environmental issues going on there too at the same time. So it's a fascinating place to always go and visit.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Hopefully that happens sometime soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. And COVID, speaking of COVID again, you spoke a little bit about going out for a walk and, communing with the trees, but like, have you been able to like scratch the like travel itch at all? Like, and how have you done that?
Yeah, I mean, in the first few months, I just sort of enjoyed the missing the travel. Like I think in some ways we've all gotten so, especially in sort of the places like the US and Europe, we're so used to being able to do like a trip or two a year, maybe. We're so we're so sort of privileged in that like we can get on a plane one day and be somewhere new the next day. Like this is such a weird experience for humans. This is so novel to our species that you can like jump on a plane in New York and then, by the evening be in Hong Kong, right?
Right.
That I kind of spend some time just being like, oh, it's kind of good to like miss travel. It's kind of good to like be like, oh, this is so, what a weird experience. And now I'm sort of tired of that.
Like that novelty has worn off.
Yeah, that novelty, like around month 6, I'm like,
yes.
I need to, and it wasn't even like, it's not even like I need to go to like Indonesia or I need to go abroad. It was just more like, I just need to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, we did do like we went up to northern Minnesota with some we were in this sort of this pod, right, where we're all of us work from home and we're sort of close friends, and so those are the only people that we're seeing right now. And I have a 9-year-old daughter, so we needed some children for her to see because she's an only child. So we're doing this pod, and we all went up to the to Lake Superior, up in northern Minnesota, and spent a couple of days, and that was lovely. That did scratch the itch a bit, and it felt like we did it, through very safely, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
We were very cautious about it, but I think those are the kind of things that we can do. Is we can go out and maybe go rent an Airbnb or stay at a cabin or something like that, and spend some time in the woods, and that at least, I think it does give a balm. It does give a break. It was great to get a break from technology for a little while and just, be out in nature a bit. So I think that's kind of the things that I think we're all going to have to probably try and do to get through this winter, because it's going to be, it's going to be long and it's going to be hard. And so we need to find any of those ways, whether it's an actual trip like that, or if it's just making sure you're getting a walk in every few days or something. But I think that is one way to kind of, hopefully get through this really long, difficult winter that we're all facing.
Yeah. I've been thinking about like, what is it about travel that we could potentially recreate like in a hyper-local way? Is it novelty, discovery, like meeting someone you never would have met? I don't know. Like, I haven't figured out, obviously, but what are the elements of what we get when we do go somewhere new that maybe we could find like a little bit of at home right now?
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, if you can find a magic elixir and give that to me,
order now,
right? I mean, and as part of the book is like how I, the mental illness stuff, but at the same time, like I love traveling. Like I'm addicted to it. Like I'm addicted to the novelty. I'm addicted to the adventure. I love to go and meet new people. I mean, I can't do it more than a few times a year, because I would just be too exhausted.
Right.
But I really do love that experience. Of that novelty, of the sense of waking up and not knowing what today is going to bring, and I think we're all missing that, right? Because it's not just that we can't go to like Bermuda, it's like also we can't even just go and have a new, go out to eat, right? We can't go and see our loved ones. Like this is such a strange and interesting test for all of us, I think, in our world, that I think it's important to try and find meaning in it if we can, in order to, get through it. Whatever that ends up being. But
Yeah. Yeah. And in the book, you talk about resilience, which I feel like fits in really nicely here.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of like self-care, or a lot of conversation about self-care, which I think is similar, but I think resilience goes one step further almost, or kind of encompasses self-care. So would you be able to share kind of like how you came upon the idea of resilience, how you practice it, or what it looks like in your life?
Yeah, I think resilience is a term. Really, I believe it started with a therapist of mine who was like, talking about it. It's become really increasingly important in mental health circles, I think, amongst the research and such. Resilience really means developing habits and practices and working with the way that you think in order to build essentially an ability to deal with your mental health issues, or for anybody, if you don't deal with mental health issues, just basically to deal with life, right? Like we all run into challenges, and resilience really means an ability to deal with it and move forward. It's not like when I was a kid, I got all that BS about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I got all the toughen up, a lot of masculinity BS.
Right.
But I was kind of in that community. And it's not that. It's not strength without wisdom. It's wisdom, right? It's learning what you need to do, self-care, right? Like whether for me it's stuff like meditation, yoga, reading, alone time, nature. I mean, it's all these different things, right? Tools.
Sleeping.
Yeah, and at the same time though, resilience isn't about like, oh, I have to go and power through. It's like knowing what your limits are and being and accepting those, right? Like, so there are trips that I know I will never take. There are places I would love to go that I will know, at least at this point, unless the situation changed, that I would probably never go because it would just be too difficult of a trip. I've learned this about myself.
Yeah.
I'm never going to do an around the world for a year trip, right? Which I thought maybe in my 20s, I'm like, I'd love to go around the world. That would be so stupid for me. I would break down at like month 2,
Right.
So resilience is learning about what your own limitations are, pushing those limitations when you feel comfortable, and then having the support system and the healthy habits to allow yourself to keep kind of poking at those limitations and getting through the hard stuff. It's much more like, I think it's a much richer and more complicated view of life than I think a lot of us sort of, the American sort of like can do attitude. Because we are mortal, we are not gonna, we all have limitations, we all have struggles, and it's okay to accept those and to understand where they come from. And it's like, and at the same time, it's also okay, yeah, to push yourself. That's great. But don't push yourself so hard that you're going to push yourself into failure all the time, So I think I hope that helps explain it. It's a little complicated and still sometimes muddy in my head, but that's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think just the word resilient versus like strong, right? Which is so black and white, like strength versus weakness, but resilience has like a little bit more nuance. And I really,
And it's like, and I love that, the idea between strength and weakness, and it's that dichotomy that we get caught in, right? And resilience is somewhere in the middle where it recognizes your weaknesses, but also, uses your strengths. And the same thing with something like courage and cowardice, everyone, courage is a virtue. Yeah. But like, no one has courage unless they feel fear first, right? Like, if you're just running into a battle and you feel no fear, is that really courage, or is that stupidity?
So is your path.
Right? Like, so I think it's sort of being able to think about those things in a richer, more complicated way, and that helped me accept who I am and my own limitations, as I've said. It helped me be able to say, oh, okay. And it helped me learn again, like, okay, I can do a 2-week trip to Vietnam, but I'm not going to go to, like I said, I'm not going to do a round the world trip. I'm not going to go to a conflict zone, for example. I'm not going to go somewhere that's potentially more dangerous. I'm going to, I have certain things which I can do, and other things which I know with my mental illness, no, I just need to, I'm not going to do that one. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Should we take a few questions?
Sure.
All right. Here we go. All right. So Brooke says, yes, I'm all about noticing the details in nature. Brooke's a forest bather, so makes sense.
Oh, lovely. I've read about that, and I want to like go to Japan and do it the way the
right?
Japanese. Yes.
I heard also, Brooke, maybe you know a little bit more about this if you're still here and want to comment, but I think in South Korea, perhaps there's like actually like parks almost that you go to forest bathe, and you can like check your vitals when you go there, and it's all set up like for that specific like therapy, which is so
Yeah,
cool.
I think I've read about that too in an article too. Yeah, that sounds right. I think South Korea.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, here we go. So Colleen says, okay, so also a comment, but I'm gonna just read it for everyone who isn't on this thread. This conversation makes me think about Anthony Bourdain. He also traveled around the world, had a great TV show. The day I learned about his suicide was still very shocking to me. We should all be kind to each other. So
yeah, and it's interesting because when I was writing the book, I had started to watch some of his stuff.
yeah.
And I think, as someone who struggled with mental illness all my life, most of my life, and who's struggled with suicidal thoughts, like it's really poignant. And to watch somebody like him go to these places, connect to people through food and through his vibrant personality. And I think that what that kind of shows is just someone like him who's so beautiful and vibrant and wonderful can struggle, right? Like someone who's so successful, like mental illness doesn't really like, it's not like you're successful and you don't have mental illness anymore. Like it's something that is in our genetics. It's in our genes. It's part of who we are. And, it was a terrible loss. But I really, but he brought so much beauty to the world when he was here. And it was really meaningful to watch, I think, and think about him as somebody who, who's gone through that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Deborah says, do you revisit Indigenous people or go for new exposure, different cultures?
Sorry, can you say that one again?
Do you revisit Indigenous people or go for new exposure, different cultures?
Both? Can I do both?
The question is, yeah,
exactly. No, honestly, it's been a few years since I've been to the Amazon, and I would love to go back and revisit. That is the part of the world right now with the most kind of the most diverse indigenous cultures, and probably in some ways some of the most under assault. So I would love to go back and do some reporting out there and journalism out there. So I'd probably go with that. I mean, the Amazon right now is one of the most threatened places on Earth, and really needs all the help it can get. So any kind of reporting I could do, I think that'd be the top of the list.
Yeah. And so for you, when you're doing that kind of reporting, is the goal to get people to change their habits or to put pressure on politicians? Like how does that play into it?
Okay, so this is such a good question, because as a journalist, you write these stories, you throw them out into the ether of the internet, and you hope it matters. And you don't know if it's going to matter or how it's going to matter. You just hope it matters. And honestly, probably most of the stories I've written have made little difference. But sometimes, once in a while, you hear that a story meant something to somebody, or that a policy got changed, or something happened. And it's very, very rare, let me tell you.
Well, there's no feedback loop there, right? Like it's like you read an article and then you move on to your breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and all of us do that. Like that's the news, right? You read it, and also like most of us don't have the power to change these things ourselves. So I think what you hope to attain with journalism is, yes, you hope to attain some kind of change and notice. I do hope that sort of this rise of increasing environmental journalism, increasing awareness. I mean, my hope is that eventually, I wish it had come sooner, but that we'll have sort of a cultural sea change, right? Mm-hmm. And we will begin to attack climate change as the frickin' beast that it is.
Right.
And we'll begin to honor indigenous cultures, and we'll begin to preserve the last places of our earth that are still relatively intact. I mean, that's what you kind of hope. And then if I can play some tiny, minuscule, tiny part in that with my journalism, great. Journalism is what I'm good at, so like I don't have a lot else I can give. There are a lot of great activists and leaders out there who do much more, good work than I can do. But if I can uplift any voices or do that, that's kind of what you tell yourself, whether or not it's true.
Yeah. No, I'm just wondering like how that like how this, I don't know, like I'm also a writer. So it's like, how does that play into everything we do, or like these conversations that we're having and everyone who's listening right now, and like what we're doing with our Tuesday night, you know?
Yeah. And that's the thing is there's a part of you that knows, I think, and that has to at least have faith that you'll never really know how these stories might have impacted the world or changed the world, or, you know, and maybe it won't even happen until you're long gone, but you have to still do it and put it out there and hope that it does have a positive impact.
Yeah.
And then just keep going and keep doing the work.
Right. Right. Exactly. Like not stopping.
Yeah. Because I mean, what else can we do in this day? You know, we have to try, right? If we get ambivalent, then the battle's already lost.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. All right. So we have a question from Justin, who's from Missouri. When you're feeling your lowest, what's the best way that those around you help to lift you up out of it? Or is it something that must just run its course?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I have an amazing wife, and she's known me a long time, so she's learned how to kind of, deal with my ups and downs. I'm a bit of an introvert, so often sometimes what I'll need is I'll just need to like go take a nap and like take downtime away from everything, and then hopefully the next day I'm better. But sometimes it's like you have to kind of let it run its course, and that means like, just doing what you need to do, whether it's, again, like if you need to sleep all day and stay into bed, whatever. If you need to call in sick into work, if you need to just binge a Netflix show, it's kind of learning that you have to take care of yourself before you can kind of, be a good parent, be a good spouse, be a good employee. So it's sort of learning those methods as to what you need in that moment, and then communicating that to your partner or your loved ones and being like, hey, when I'm like this is kind of what I need.
Right.
And, I'm not asking you to like do anything, or, but like, this is, you need to like give me space or just give me support or like tell me it's okay,
Right.
But a lot of mental illness, I think a lot of that resilience is learning also how to like make sure you're not putting that on your partner, right? Like,
Right.
they're not your therapist and all that. So make sure you're not putting that on your loved ones as much as you can. Obviously, you have people you need to be able to be supportive, but you
Yeah.
don't want to get in that codependent place too. So there's ways of I think mitigating that. But yeah, often, I mean, I'll just sometimes have to have a couple of days where I'm like non-functional and just don't do anything.
Right.
Maybe read a book and watch a bunch of movies or something. But and then hopefully, usually I kind of come out on the other side. But that's not the case for everybody else. Some people need longer.
Right.
Some people need different things. So we're all so unique when it comes to this stuff. But that's kind of how it works for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kim commented this, and I was thinking this as well, that required a lot of self-awareness, what you just said. So it seems like that also is part of the journey of being able to even have those like boundaries and those communication methods, whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I've been doing this since I was 10, and I've been in therapy since I was 10. So the self-awareness is like, it's hard fought and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
So if a lot of people who kind of discovered they struggle with this stuff in their 20s and 30s, it does take a long time. But I will say that like with that journey, you can get there, and it does get easier. It never goes away.
Right.
But it does get easier. And as you get to know yourself and what you need and how to communicate that to others, it can, and also just like getting a good therapist is like really helpful. So those, it does take time though. And in some ways I've been weirdly lucky that I started so young. Because I think a lot of people who
about it.
What?
It's a good way to think about it, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is. I mean, I was weirdly like, I feel in some ways very lucky that I have all this built up now. I'm 41. And I've gotten to this place, and it's not perfect, and it's always going to be there. But like, I have all these tools built up, which, if I had started at 35, I would be a wreck this year. Right. Like, I mean, this would be, so I've been kind of, a little lucky in that sense.
Right. Like you've already built a lot of the tools for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is so from Deborah again, and Deborah's calling, I think, from St. Paul as well. So when you are traveling, I assume you miss your therapy sessions. So what do you do at that point, and what do you do for support out in new environments?
Sure, that's a great question. So when I'm traveling, I don't have my therapist. I have all the things, all the tools in my mind. I do a number of things. I've learned that like having really good, funny podcasts is great. Any kind of podcast that's like lighthearted or something you're enjoyable. Because I'll like, if I'm on a road in a country and they're driving like crazy, I'll just put that on and I'll just kind of look down and I'll just listen to that for the 3 hours to get to my next destination. Or if I'm on a plane, that can be really helpful. I'll have meditations that I'll have downloaded as well. If I'm having a panic attack or in a really bad place and I just need to like hear somebody else's voice kind of talking me down, I'll have set up meditations. I also bring a little like token, like a little animal on pretty much every trip. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's kind of like a little personal teddy bear, like something I can just kind of grab and be like, okay, this is, I'm okay. Everything's good. The plane's not going to go down, and it makes me think a lot of my daughter whenever I have that. She's 9. And so it kind of reminds me, this is hard, but I'll be home soon. So it's a lot of that mental talking to yourself. It's a lot of sort of learning the things that help you kind of in a moment when you're very anxious. So, reminding yourself that it's a panic attack doesn't last forever. Reminding yourself that I often count down the days. I'll be like, I'll be home in 5 days, this is day whatever. And just those little things can have helped me a lot. But then, usually when I'm there and in the middle of my experience and chasing whatever animal I'm going after in the forest, I'm usually a lot better, like, because I love that part of it. That's why I go, right? And so that in the middle of the trip, once I get there, I have a few days where I'm pretty, just kind of soaking in the nature and the beauty and the experience. So I've learned too, again, about resilience and limitations. I've learned that I should only do trips that are about 10 days to 2 weeks. If I do anything longer, I probably should bring my wife with, or I should not do it. Because I've learned that like, after that, I start to get really tired and my chance for more sort of panic attacks and things will go up. So I've just, and I have to kind of structure my trips around that reality. I've also learned what trips I can do and which ones I need to say no to when the opportunities come. So it's all, and it's a crapshoot too. You could go and something new will happen and it will throw you off, but you try to use those different tools to like keep yourself centered.
Right. Yeah. Those are great tips. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So George, switching back to the Amazon here, on the biodiversity question, your comment about the Amazon, I would argue that Panama and the southern part of Costa Rica are as diverse, if not more so, because they have multiple microclimates, mountainous, and the Amazon only has elevations in the west, in Venezuela and Peru.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's still some debate, right? Because we haven't gone out and actually counted everything. Right. So I totally agree that there are places in Central America that may be just as rich. There was some research a few years ago that showed that the most biodiverse places, at least for mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and I think certain types of plants, there's this part, and I've actually Yasuni National Park in Ecuador, and part of like Peru, like basically where the Andes and the Amazon hit. And there's like cloud forest and then rainforest, is potentially, at least according to those types of species, the most biodiverse place that we know of. But again, if you start to add in things that we don't know, right? Insects, fungi, other things. And it depends on how big of a region are we talking. If we're talking about like most biodiverse country, or are we talking about the most biodiverse, 500 square hectares. Right. So yeah, but I totally agree that the Central America has some of the most biodiverse places for sure, and may rival the Amazon, and maybe we'll scientists will be able to determine that, but
right, or we'll never know.
or we'll never know. Yeah, and but so much of the diversity in these regions too, I think we all forget, is really wrapped up in insects, and those have barely even been identified. Like if you go to the Amazon and you spend some time there, you'll probably see a number of insects that haven't even been named by scientists. So wild. Yeah. So that's cool. It's really cool. Like I feel like in a world where everything is like often defined and like this is how it is, it's really special to have things that are still like a little bit mysterious or Well, that's one of the wonderful things about being a journalist on nature, environmental journalist, is once in a while you get to do those wonderful articles about new species being named and discovered, and the kind of that kind of stuff where it really just at least for me, excites the imagination and blows your mind that, yeah, we're living in this day and age when we can do all these technological things, but we haven't even named,
Right.
like a tiny percent of the insects of the world. I mean, that's crazy.
That's crazy.
And what could, what's still out there and what are we at risk of losing, and all those kind of questions start to crop up.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we're coming close to the hour. So if you haven't gotten your question in, everyone, now's the time. We're going to let's do like a minute or two so you can like tell everyone where to find you,
Sure.
how they can get your book, anything like that.
Yeah. So I have a website, jeremyhance.com. I'm also active on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. As far as where to find the book, it's pretty much anywhere books are sold. We're all shopping online, so you can go to bookshop.org where you can order it from a local bookstore, which is a great way to do it. Of course, it's on places like Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those places too. So it's also available. I should mention this. It's available on audio, which I know a lot of people.
I listened to it on audio.
Yeah,
it was great.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
And it was done by an award-winning voice actor.
Yeah.
And so if you're not, the person who wants to do the actual reading but likes to listen instead, that's a great way to do it. It's also on all the e-readers on Kindle and all those kind of things too.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, I should have said that. Everyone listen to it on audio if you are a person that, like me, I like to listen. Sometimes I read, but
yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it's a great, it's a great way. Like I have a lot of friends who like they just listen to all their books, and it's like that's awesome that we have that now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And especially when there's like a great narrator, it like just adds another dimension to the book.
Yes. And he does a really good job with like the the humorous parts and then the more serious parts.
Get anxious listening to him. So I was like, this is really full sensory experience.
Yeah, he's great.
Cool. All right, so we have one last question to round it out, and a thank you from Kim. Thank you for sharing your story. I enjoyed the personal experiences and insights. So that's from Kim from New York. And then, all right, last question from Deborah. Are you working for a specific group or magazine, or do you submit your articles on your own?
Sure. So I am a columnist for Manga Bay, which is the website I've kind of worked through all my life. But I'm a freelancer, so I'm sort of a columnist. But I'm not there full time. And so I've had a blog on The Guardian. I've written for a bunch of other places. So I sort of as a freelancer, you're kind of submitting all over the place. I mean, this year has really been focused on the book. But yeah, I write for pretty much anyone who's interested in whatever stories I'm telling or comes to me with an idea. And then we kind of go from there. But most of my stuff is on, I would say, Manga Bay and The Guardian in the UK.
Cool. And I just remembered one question I had for you. So I lied. Now this is the last question. I assume you were going to have a book tour. Like, how has COVID and all of this affected kind of like how you like get a book out, or like what that process is like?
No one knows how to do this book. Like we're all these first time authors. We're all like, what do we do? Yeah. So we do things like this, right? Like it's funny because about a month before the COVID really hit, my wife and I were making the guest list for like the book launch party. We were going to have it at a local brewery. There's going to be like 200 people. It was going to be so exciting. And then, this happens. So on the one hand, it's been really difficult to get the word out because it's a hard time to get. And also between this and the election, the news media is not right. Like nobody, and understandably, like, but at the same time, it was a weird book to kind of have come out during coronavirus to be able to talk about sort of anxiety and travel in a really new way, right? In a way that felt really important, and to talk about mental illness at a time when I think a lot of people are really struggling. Yeah. So I feel like even if the book has had, it's been harder to kind of get the publicity or get, to be able to do the parties and the book tours. It's been an important moment to sort of, for me to feel like I can talk about this stuff really, and maybe, get people to think about mental health in a different way, or think about what their own struggles are. And that, I mean, I've had people come to me and say that they're starting to get help and stuff after reading the book. So, that's where the meaningfulness comes in. And we're all just flying by the seat of our pants and adjusting to this reality. So, but hopefully it'll get, hopefully once there's a vaccine and stuff, we'll be able to find a new reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say we're getting lots of thanks in the comments, but also just like from me as well. Like, thank you so much for sharing and, you
Yeah.
know, being so open with everyone. And I do think that it is incredibly timely, obviously. And your years of experience and, like you said, like starting early
Yeah.
is really valuable to kind of offer like a deeper look at like what it looks like to manage your mental health and what resilience is and all of that stuff. So really appreciate you kind of like sharing your years of wisdom with all of us.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I mean it's a weird thing to be an expert in, but you know, if I can help just a few people out, you know, that's then it's worth it, right? That's the important thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I appreciate all the things.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. All right. So last thing for everyone watching, go read the book or listen to the book if that's your thing. Tell us what you think on Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. And this is it for Mappy Hour for the year. So thank you all for being part of 2020. And I'll see you all in 2021 when we're going to go outside together. And it's going to be lovely.
Yeah.
All right. And thank you again, Jeremy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Bye, everyone.